welcome to another edition of Off to Tube as we go through AP World History. We're now in week 2 of distance learning, and week 2 actually brings us into a whole new time period. But before I start contextualization and start looking at what the new theme is, I want to take a little bit of time just to look at how history has been written and how history has been organized in general. When we look at the study of history, and as we've been looking at it, it's been divided into different time periods, and we've had different themes for each of those time periods. But if we look specifically at how those time periods have been labeled and have been named, what we realize is that historians seem to really favor two of the 6 time periods, because if we look at kind of the earlier time periods, they seem to revolve around the classical era, right? You have the pre-classical era, the classical era, and the post-classical era. So in a sense, you have everything that happened before the classical era, and then everything that happened after the classical era. Well, we see that again when we're looking at the early modern era, the modern era, which we're going to start today, and then the postmodern era, which is going to be essentially the last 150 years. So when we think about the way that history is written, the question then has to be, what is it about those 2 time periods that historians seem to think is really important? Why do we see all of our time periods revolving around the classical and the modern era? And that's largely due to the events that we're going to be studying during this time period. And when we look at the study of history has been dominated by Western historians, those historians that are going to be covering mostly European and now American history as well. And so when we look at the study of history and the way history has been organized, it has largely been organized and codified into the developments that are particular to European history. So we look at the pre-classical era. There's some incredible things that happened in the pre-classical era, from the invention of farming to the Egyptian civilization, which is one of the longest lasting civilizations in human history, ancient Mesopotamians, ancient China. But that's all just pre-classical, because who are the major and really important civilizations to European historians? Greece and Rome, because who doesn't love the classic days of Greek philosophy and architecture and art to the Roman Empire, the largest land-based empire at that day that had really defined Europe as a whole. And then what constitutes the post-classical era? Well, it's anything that happens after the fall of the Roman Empire. Not to mention the fact that you have Islam that really keeps the world going at that point in time, and the Mongols, who are going to have huge implications. Oh, that's just all after the Roman Empire fell. It's not as important. And when we've been studying the early modern era, we've been studying about how Europe begins to start to catch up to the rest of the world. This is when Europe begins to pick itself off the ground. It goes from bumble scum, can't take 2 hands, smack their own bums, to eventually smashing their way into the Indian Ocean trade networks because of their gunpowder technology and naval technology, and in general, just desire for access to Asian goods. So when we get into the modern era, Europe has begun to become more and more dominant. And when we look at the modern era, this is going to be Europe's second golden age. This is when Europe is going to come to dominate not just the global economy, but global politics. European empires are going to span across the entire globe. There will be a phrase that becomes popular: the sun never sets on the British Empire, which was literally true, as when the sun rose in Great Britain, it was setting in their holdings in Australia and other places in Oceania and in Asia. And so Europe is going to have a second golden age. And so when we think about the theme of the modern era, when we think about this theme of what does it mean to be modern, so mod and chic, right? What does that mean? Well, we have to look at a lot of the developments that occur in Europe, because Europe is going to define a modern society for us. And there's going to be 2 major definitions for a modern society. And the first is what you are studying in Chapter 17. So when we look at the modern era and this theme of modernity, Chapter 17 is going to outline those events that are going to shape Europe into becoming a modern society. And those events are our Atlantic revolutions. The revolutions in France, the revolution in the United States, which is really just a war for independence, the revolutions in Haiti, the revolutions in Latin America. So what are these revolutions? Well, these revolutions are major shifts within each of these societies in order to try and implement those Enlightenment values that Europe had begun to think about during the early modern era. The Enlightenment, the philosophical revolution where thinkers began to apply scientific principles, began to look at things, at society, politics, using reason, logic, using scientific methods to try and think about what would a perfect society look like. And in general, probably the biggest Enlightenment philosophical idea that I really want you to know is the idea that's known as popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, which essentially means power in a state, in a society, should not rest in the hands of one single individual, one single monarch that God has said, "He shall be my monarch." But power should actually rest in the people. It is the people that give any sort of government power. And so during the Enlightenment, philosophers started looking at how and what that power should look like. What are the rights of individuals and rights of people within a society? What are those things that governments should be protecting and not harming? And the big idea that comes out of the thinkers like Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes, Voltaire is that if a government does not follow the general will of the people, if they do not understand popular sovereignty, then it is the people's duty to then overthrow that government and institute a new one. And so that's what you see happening all across the Atlantic, is a popular uprising, uprisings of the people against their governments because they feel their governments were not serving their general will. And so when we look at this definition of a modern society, the first definition is one that is going to implement Enlightenment values, one that is going to be an enlightened society. But as you read through chapter 17, something becomes incredibly clear because Strayer's chapter title is Atlantic Revolutions and their echoes. Because what we're looking at is these Atlantic revolutions that are going to start out the modern era. These are going to be those events that transition Europe out of the early modern era and into the modern era. What we want to then think about is, well, to what extent did they actually make a change? To what extent did they implement those Enlightenment values that they were promoting and saying was fueling their revolutions? And so when we look at this first supplemental assignment, we're going to look at one of those specific revolutions. We're going to look at the revolution in Haiti. And this supplemental assignment is a CCOT organizer. And the whole idea is, again, to look at and evaluate the extent to which revolution caused changes in Haiti from 1700 to 1914. So let's just do step 2, because I know step 1's putting your name on it, right. But step 2 is to break down the prompt. Well, the prompt says evaluate the extent. Anytime you see that action word there, evaluate, analyze, describe, and explain, whatever it is, you should always be thinking EPEX. So I want to be thinking about whatever the topic or theme of the question is. I want to then divide it into EPEX. That way I can really take a close look at it. And anytime you see the extent, you always want to think about those two qualifying words, somewhat or mostly. Because we're going to be evaluating the extent to which revolution caused changes in Haiti from 1700 to 1914. So when we look at the extent to which revolution caused changes, that's our topic, our main idea. Haiti is going to be our place. And of course, oh look, I did that wrong. Our time period is going to be 1700 to 1914. So we're going to be looking at specifically Haiti before the revolutions, Haiti during the revolution, and then Haiti after the revolution by the time the 19th century comes to a close and we get into the postmodern era. Because again, the whole goal is to look at, did the revolution somewhat change Haiti? Did it mostly change Haiti? Well, can we look at things that mostly changed, but some things that maybe just somewhat stayed the same, or vice versa? That's what you're going to be doing. So in order to complete this, the first step you have to do is then start doing the brainstorm. I want you to start out by using your Chapter 17 notes to begin to record evidence in each of the boxes broken down by PECs about what Haiti was like before the revolution. For example, Haiti was a French colony. That was politically how they were governed. They were governed by the French king. They were part of the French Empire. They had French governors that were sent over from France to then rule over. So again, that's an example of putting evidence there, this being my specific piece of evidence. I've given you the middle. The middle is going to be the Haitian Revolution is a fascinating event, and it is incredibly complicated. So what I essentially did is I took what happened to Haiti during the revolution under the rule of Toussaint L'Ouverture, who's going to be the leader eventually of the Haitian Revolution. And so I've given you those specific pieces of evidence there. You can see they're in bolded, and then I also gave a little bit more explanation as we look at it as well. In order to do the end, you're going to be clicking on this link, which is going to take you to this reading. It's actually a lecture done by a college professor that you're going to be looking at. You can essentially look at at any rate, January 1804. This is going to give you a basic idea of what happened, and then the professor then goes into more specifically what happened. But he's going to look at political trends. He's going to look at economic trends. He's going to look at social trends, and then of course there's going to be a few things about the role of Christianity that I want you to notice in this document as well. So you're going to use this document to record evidence about what happened in Haiti after the revolution had ended and after Haiti had become an independent place. Oh, well, that's interesting. Haiti is independent from European control. What a nice little piece of evidence there that you can use. And that would be specific enough, but then you might also want to then get the names of Haitian rulers to be added. So you're going to do the brainstorming on that. Of course, as you start finishing up, I want you to start looking across these rows to see, okay, politically, how did Haiti stay the same? Politically, how did Haiti change? Economically, how did Haiti stay the same? How did Haiti change? Culturally, how did it stay the same? How did it change? Socially, same thing. I want you to specify 2 changes that occurred and specify 2 continuities that occurred from the research. And the real focus of this assignment is going to be writing an analysis statement. So for one of those changes that you found and one of those continuities, I want you to write analysis statements. So you're going to be writing 2 analysis statements. Just to review, I wanted to give you an example of an analysis statement. Remember, anytime that you're doing an analysis statement, you're essentially looking at, well, why was that the case? So in this case, for a CCOT essay, we're looking at why did it change or why did it stay the same? So I gave you the example of one of the continuities that you are going to be reading about. And that is that no matter if it's before, in the middle, or after, Haiti's economy is solely agricultural. So then I asked myself the question, well, Mr. Oftedal, why was agriculture the main part of the Haitian economy before the revolution, during the revolution, and after the revolution? Well, and here you go. I start out my analysis statement with just kind of a brief statement of why I think that's the case. The reason why agriculture continued to be the backbone of the economy was because of Haiti's former dependence on France. And I'm actually going to modify that and say economic dependence on France. And now I'm going to explain what I mean by that, because again, an analysis can't just be a simple statement of why. You have to explain it. Because their economy before the revolution was set up to provide Europe, France in particular, with cheap resources like sugar, they lacked the infrastructure to diversify their economy after they declared independence. And if you wanted me to keep explaining, I mean, land was really their only resource that they had because the French made sure that that was all they had. The French only wanted that Haitian colony so that they could get access to cheap resources, so that they could put sugar in their tea and in their coffee and in their chocolate, because the French, like all Europeans, just can't handle really bitter foods. It has to be sweet for them, those little wussies, and you can't handle it. So that's what I want you to be focusing on. And when I look over your supplemental assignment this week, I'm going to be focusing mainly on how well you're doing your analysis statement. Again, I know that DBQs are going to be what our focus is, but that doesn't mean that we don't still want to practice those skills that are going to also be useful in writing our DBQ essays. And analysis statements are one of our ways to earn points under the analysis and reasoning section on the rubric. So that's your supplemental assignment. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oftedal out.